Big Chungus and the Quest for Carrots is a puzzle platformer, where a large rabbit named Big Chungus journeys through many timelines in order to collect the carrots that have been scattered across time. The quest will take player through many levels, each with a distinct style. The player will need to find a way to collect carrots in each level to complete the game. The game will be a 2D platformer, with a large focus on puzzle elements, and having the player alter the stage before they play it. There will be multiple levels, and each will have a different visual style and layout. For one example, one could be cartoonish, and the next one could be a noir style or a futuristic setting. Each level will give the player different items at the start. They can be placed on the level before playing it. Good use of these items will be necessary to complete the level. The main mechanic of the game is that all levels start with a building phase, where the player can place a set amount of objects and platforms in the level. The player will use this to construct a level that allows them to reach the carrots and the end goal while avoiding obstacles and enemies. The building phase will give the player different ways to solve problems. For example, the player could use a block as a platform to jump on, or as a wall to stop enemy projectiles. This makes the platforming phase more or less difficult depending on the player's decisions, and makes the game fun to replay and see if there are better layouts you can make. Once the player is in the platforming phase, they will have a simple left-right movement and a jump. The player movement options are expanded by the objects they place in the level, like springs and conveyor belts. They will use this to collect the carrots and reach the end goal of each level.
Each level will have a different design based on our 2D animation art to create the alternate dimensions. Each level will start with enemies and obstacles set in place for the player to avoid and coins/power-ups for the player to catch. The pieces for the player to put in place will be in a menu on the lower right corner. The score, timer, and attempts made to complete the level will reside in the upper left corner. As seen in the demo, the players are allowed to create most of the gameplay themselves with few limits such as enemy and obstacle placement. 3 menus will appear in the game. One for the items, a start menu, and a pause menu with quit and continue. The start menu will have 2 buttons, start and quit. Start will bring up level 1, and quit will exit the application. The items menu will scroll up on an equivalent to mouse over, and the menu will go back down when the mouse leaves. To select an object from the menu or already placed before, the player must click and drag. The pause menu will come up when the player hits Q and will be able to either continue gameplay or quit back to the main menu. When the pause menu is open, the timer will freeze. As seen in the mock-up, players will interact with our game by dragging the object to where they want it on the screen. Since they will most likely be using a grid, the game object will snap to the closest grid location. To play the level, players will click Start. Here, all the enemies will start to move and launch their projectiles. To make the player move, standard WASD to move and spacebar to jump. Since X1A supports Xbox controls, this may be a possibility in our future.
This slide will show just the functions of each of the objects that will be in our game. The class diagram with all the code on it will be the next slide. As for this, in the middle we have the player, which they can be moved with arrow keys or possibly the A and D keys. We're still working on that part. And they can jump, and they can be killed by stuff in the environment. On the right side we have platforms and walls, those sorts of things. The basic ones will just be solid objects. They can, well, most everything can be placed in the editor, but the platforms, they're just solid objects. The player can land on them, stand on them, walk across them, not much else. There's a movable platform that will be, you can move it as if you were in editor mode during gameplay, which is just by dragging and dropping it. Otherwise, it's still just a standard platform. The conveyor belt will essentially move a player across it, either left or right, whatever the setting is. The spring platform, if a player lands on it, it will launch them higher into the air. Like, I believe Sonic games have something like that. Then in the bottom right we have interactable items. There's only 2 planned at the moment. Carrots, which are the goal of each level. There will be multiple in each level, and the player must navigate throughout the level to pick up all of them in order to complete it. That's your goal. Then there are switches. Some items like the conveyor belt, or maybe some of the obstacles, which we'll get to, can be turned on or off with a switch. The player goes up to it, presses the button, flips the switch. As far as obstacles go, mainly they're going to be spikes. They're kind of like a platform, but if a player lands on it, they die. Restart the level. There are fireballs. There's going to be some kind of projectile that fires out of a wall-mounted cannon of some sort. Kills the player if the player runs into one. However, if there's a wall in the way, the fireball will just be blocked by the wall. There's also fans, which will, if a player is on the same horizontal plane as them, then the player will be pushed away from the fan. However, again, if a wall is in the way, the airflow will be blocked by a wall, so it won't affect the player. There is the possibility of enemies being added in. They would just be basic. They walk across the platform from end to end. If a player touches them, they die. But if, say, the player were to, jump on their head like in Mario, maybe that could kill them. Or if they were pushed into spikes, fireballs, they can basically die in all of the same ways the player can. Then we move on to... Here is the proper class diagram with all of the property names and function names. I should mention that everything you see here is subject to change. Like some of these might not need to be protected properties or whatever, just so you know. So most everything in the game will be dependent upon the player because there is going to be some kind of collision detection, such as if the player were to jump or fall. If they run into a platform of any kind, then they'd have to stop falling because they just landed on a solid object. Therefore, the player's update collision detection will be what causes these things to happen for the most part. There will be a function, update collision, that if the player touches a carrot, it'll collect the carrot and increase the count, but if the player runs into spikes, they die. That kind of thing. And then other things will probably be dependent upon the platform and wall section, which is going to be its own class. So the movable platform, conveyor belt, the spring, spikes, all those will be dependent upon the platform wall class. These are all subclasses of that class. And the wall is just going to be a vertical platform, so a higher height than its width. That's the only difference. Fireball launcher is just here doing its own thing. The fireball projectile is dependent on it because that's what spawns it. The launcher is what spawns the fireballs. The fan is here, pushes the player. So the fireball launcher has a function to launch fireballs, so it just spawns them. The fireballs move. They have collision detection as well, but only so far as if they run into a wall, they disappear.
Timeline. For week 1 to week 3, we are making the pre-production of the game, which means we'll make project focus, base structure, gameplay features, and gameplay mechanics. Week 4, we're doing the milestone 1, which is this presentation. Week 5, we're starting to work with basic mechanics and gameplay features for the actual implementation in the code. For week 6, we'll continue to work with the gameplay mechanics. We'll change them if we need and upgrade. Week 7, we'll have the first alpha build that will work and will include all necessities mechanics that we need. Week 8, we'll implement our alpha HUD to alpha build. So at week 9, our alpha build will be ready for milestone 2. From week 10 to week 12, we'll polish the alpha build, we'll add and change mechanics. Also, we'll make design tweaks. So For the week 12, our beta build will be ready. It will include all gameplay mechanics and all they will be playable. From week 13 to week 14, we'll polish the final build, we'll make final changes, and for the week 14, our game will be ready at milestone 4 due. Necessities versus desires. We have a couple of necessary things that we'll do. That includes moving platforms, 3 levels, static obstacles which appear at the beginning of the level before the player will start building his path, different types of platforms, different settings for the level. It means art style or other things. For example, one level can be set in Chicago 1920s in noir style, and other one will be pixel game in medieval era. Also we'll make main menu and HUD. For the desirable things we have opening cinematic, ending cinematic, dynamic obstacles and enemies, different character movement for each level that will vary because of the setting and special events. Weather conditions, day-night change, 5 levels, level collectibles, side-scrolling if we will need it, and sound effects. Tools of communication. We use a GroupMe app for communication. If we need to meet, we'll set it in a GroupMe. We have 2 meetings in class each week, and other meetings are scheduled as needed through GroupMe if we need it. We use Google Drive and Google Docs for file transfer. We use Photoshop for image editing and making assets. We use Visual Studio with Monogame for programming and Trello as organizer. Also, we use a GitHub. Milestone 1. It is what you see now, the concept, reproduction in this presentation. Milestone 2. It will be alpha stage, it will have basic mechanics and visuals, and it will work, probably. Milestone 3. It will be beta stage, so most of the mechanics will be implemented and they will work as they meant to be, and we'll polishing the game. Milestone 4. Final build will be ready, it will be a polished game, and up to that time we'll work in adding new features if we'll have time, or desired features.